Hello and welcome. I'm Pallavi Sharma and you're watching This World Weekly, a show where we bring you the top stories of the week from across the world. Let's start with the market check. Indian equity indices ended lower on 30th of April. Sensex was down 0.75% at 76,913.5 points and Nifty was down 0.74% at 23,997.55 points. In the broader market, Nifty mid-cap shed 1% and small-cap fell 0.5%. Top Nifty losers were Tata Motors PV, Hindalco Industries, Eternal, HUL and Axis Bank, while the gainers were Bajaj Auto, Sun Pharma, Infosys, Tech Mahindra and Bajaj Finance. Except IT, all sectoral indices ended in red, with metal index declining 2%, while PSU Bank, Private Bank, Consumer Durables and Realty down 1% each. The market will be shut on May 1st on the account of Maharashtra Day. India's rupee weakened further to fresh record low of 95.33 per dollar. The Iran war has now entered a dangerous new phase. Oil routes are blocked, global trade is disrupted, and the United States is scrambling to regain control of one of the most critical choke points in the world, the Strait of Hormuz. But what's even more striking right now is not just the war outside. It's the growing divide inside the Trump administration itself. Let's start with the situation on ground. As per reports, after nearly 2 months of the conflict, the US-led war in Iran has already cost over $25 billion with hundreds of missiles, naval deployments, and massive military resources used. At the same time, the Strait of Hormuz, through which nearly 20% of the world's oil flows, has been effectively choked. Shipping traffic has collapsed, oil prices have surged, and global energy markets are on the edge. To deal with this, the United States under Donald Trump is now trying to build a new international coalition, a maritime alliance designed to secure shipping lanes and restart global trade. The proposed coalition, sometimes referred to as a maritime security framework, would involve multiple countries contributing naval support, intelligence, and diplomatic backing to ensure ships can safely pass through the region again. But here's the catch. America's traditional allies are not fully on board. Trump has openly expressed frustration with NATO partners and even hinted at reducing US troop presence in Germany after disagreements over the Iran war strategy. In simple terms, the US is trying to build a coalition because its old one isn't working anymore. Now, this external challenge is being matched by something equally serious internally. Inside the Trump administration, there is a growing divide between two key personalities, Pete Hegseth and J.D. Vance. On one side, Hegseth, the defense secretary, is strongly defending the war. He insists that the operation is necessary and claims that US has obliterated Iran's nuclear capabilities despite rising costs and criticism. He also is pushing an aggressive strategy, expanding the naval blockade globally and tightening control over maritime routes. But on the other side is the Vice President of US, J.D. Vance, and his stance is very different. According to multiple reports, Vance has privately questioned the Pentagon's version of events. He has raised concerns about whether the US military is presenting the full picture to Trump, especially around missile stockpile depletion, actual progress in the war, and the long-term sustainability of the strategy. In fact, reports suggest Vance has asked whether the Pentagon is feeding half-truths to the president. Now, that's a serious accusation. And that divide matters because wars are not just fought in the battlefields. They also shape the internal decision making. If the top leadership is not aligned, strategy becomes inconsistent. Meanwhile, the situation itself remains unsolved. The US continues its blockade on Iranian ports. Iran has responded with threats, seizures of ships, and potential mining of the strait. which could take months to fully clear. At one point, shipping traffic dropped to just a handful of vessels per day. And despite all of this escalation, there is still no clear end game. Even Trump, who initially said that the war would last for 4 to 6 weeks max, has now admitted that there is no fixed timeline. So the big question now is, can the US stabilize the Strait of Hormuz and bring allies back together, or will internal divisions and global skepticism turn this into a much longer, more complicated conflict? Because right now, the biggest risk may not just be Iran. It may be uncertainty inside Washington itself. The global market is facing a serious disruption due to the energy market collapse right now. It's more like a shortage of fuel everywhere in the world. But Iran is facing a very different issue. It is producing more oil than it can store. Yes, there is excessive oil. But how and why is that a problem? Our next report explains.
Iran is running out of space to store its oil, and the reason lies in rising tensions and a blockade in one of the world's most critical energy choke points, the Strait of Hormuz. Right now, Iran is producing roughly 3 to 3.5 million barrels of oil per day. Out of this, it was exporting close to 1.5 to 2 million barrels daily before tensions escalated. But after the US-led restrictions and naval pressure, exports have dropped sharply. And that's created a massive imbalance, because production hasn't stopped, but shipments have. As a result, oil is piling up. Iran's total storage capacity, both on land and offshore, is estimated to be around 100 to 120 million barrels. And according to reports, a significant portion of this is already filled. At the current pace, Iran could run out of available storage space in just a few weeks to a couple of months if exports don't resume. Now zoom out for a second, because this isn't just Iran's problem. The Strait of Hormuz, where all of this is happening, 20% of the world's total oil supply passing through one narrow route. When tensions rise at the Strait of Hormuz, the entire global energy system feels it. Oil prices have surged past $100 per barrel in recent weeks, driven by fears of supply disruption and shipping risks. Shipping itself has become more expensive and more dangerous. Insurance premiums for oil tankers in the region have reportedly jumped by 30 to 50%, and several vessels are either being delayed or rerouted to avoid the conflict zone. But here's the bigger risk for Iran. If storage tanks hit full capacity, the country may be forced to shut down oil wells, and that's not easy to reverse. Restarting production can damage reservoirs and reduce long-term output, which means even bigger economic losses. With exports curtailed and storage nearing capacity, Iran has already begun reducing oil production. Analysts estimate that output, which stood at approximately 2.75 million barrels per day prior to the blockade, could decline to between 1.2 and 1.3 million barrels per day by mid-May if current conditions persist. Iran is also reportedly bringing older, previously decommissioned vessels back into service to store excess oil. In addition to stationary storage, Iran continues to employ ship-to-ship transfers, particularly in regions such as the Malacca Strait. At the same time, this blockade is part of a larger geopolitical strategy. Typically, it takes around 2 months for Iranian crude to reach key destinations, particularly in China, which remains the primary buyer. After delivery, buyers often have an additional 2 months to complete payments. This means that the full impact of reduced exports may not be felt for 3 to 4 months. Once this lag period passes, the revenue consequences are expected to be substantial. Analysts estimate that the blockade could reduce Iran's oil-related income by between $200 million and $250 million per day at current prices.
India is one of the fastest growing major economies in the world right now. We have climbed global GDP rankings, built highways, pushed digital payments, and doubled down on infrastructure. But now, a global brokerage has issued a blunt warning to Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Bernstein says India could under-deliver its potential. And the reasons? jobs, AI, subsidies, and a deeper structural problem. The most urgent concern raised is the impact of AI on India's job market. India's services sector, particularly IT and business process outsourcing, has been a massive employment engine for decades, employing millions and supporting the rise of middle class. However, Bernstein estimates that 10 to 15 million jobs could be at risk as generative AI tools rapidly automate routine coding, customer support, and back office functions. Now, the concern is amplified by the fact that India is not at the forefront of building foundational AI models. Instead, much of the value creation is happening in the US and China, raising the risk that India becomes a consumer in the global AI economy rather than a creator. Now, this leads to the second major issue. Manufacturing is not ready to absorb displaced workers. In theory, as services jobs decline, manufacturing should pick up the slack. But Bernstein points out that India has been relatively late in building large-scale manufacturing ecosystems for the employees who are being displaced. Manufacturing's share in employment and GDP has not expanded fast enough, meaning India could face a dangerous imbalance. Millions of jobs at risk in services with no equivalent job creation engine to replace them. Another concern is how India is allocating its financial resources. Bernstein highlights that subsidies are consuming a massive portion of government spending. Agricultural subsidies alone estimated at around 3 to 4 lakh crore rupees annually, while various state-level cash transfer schemes could add another 1.7 to 2.5 lakh crore rupees each year. While these measures provide short-term relief and political support, Bernstein argues that they are a very expensive way to buy growth. Now, this ties into another structural weakness in India: low investment in research and development. Despite ambitions to lead in areas like semiconductors, electric vehicles, and artificial intelligence, India's research and development spending remains relatively low compared to global peers. The gap between ambition and actual investment is very, very stark. Without significantly increasing spending on innovation, India risks missing out on the next wave of the technological transformation in the world. When all these factors are put together, Bernstein's broader warning becomes more clear. India risks falling into a low productivity trap. In such a scenario, economic growth continues, but at a very slower pace, driven more by consumption rather than innovation or productivity gains. Jobs do not grow fast enough. High quality employment becomes scarce, and the economy becomes increasingly dependent on imported technology rather than domestic breakthroughs. Now, to prevent this too, Bernstein outlines 8 key fault lines India needs to address: building leadership in artificial intelligence, reforming agriculture, scaling manufacturing, improving infrastructure quality, rebalancing subsidies versus capital expenditure, increasing R&D investment, refining energy and EV policies, and strengthening overall state capacity, including taxation systems. These are not short-term fixes. They require sustained policy focus over years. Importantly, the report does acknowledge India's strength. It highlights strong macroeconomic stability, a visible push on infrastructure, and a government that is willing to invest in long-term growth. But the central message is very clear. The next phase of India's growth will be far more challenging than the last. UAE has shaken the world with one big announcement this week. The country is quitting the OPEC, or the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. Now, here's why this is very important for the world. The decision may weaken OPEC, dominated by Saudi Arabia, which is its rival. This could translate to further turbulence for the energy markets amid the Iran war. Our next report explains the significance of this organization and why it could be an advantage for India.
The global oil market could be on the verge of a major shakeup, and this time, the trigger is a surprising move by the United Arab Emirates. In the middle of an ongoing energy crisis, the UAE has decided to step away from OPEC, one of the most powerful oil alliances in the world. And this decision could have ripple effects across the globe, especially for countries like India. Let's start with why this matters. OPEC isn't just any group. It controls roughly 35 to 40% of global oil production and an even larger share of proven oil reserves. By coordinating how much oil member countries produce, OPEC has historically been able to influence global prices, sometimes pushing them higher by cutting supply and sometimes stabilizing markets. Now, the UAE has been one of OPEC's key members. It currently produces around 3 to 3.4 million barrels of oil per day, placing it among the top producers in the group. But here's the catch. Under OPEC agreements, countries have strict production quotas, and the UAE has been increasingly unhappy with these limits because it has already invested billions of dollars to expand its oil capacity, and it wants to produce more. In fact, the UAE is aiming to ramp up its production capacity to nearly 5 million barrels per day by 2027. That's a huge increase, but under OPEC rules, it can't fully utilize this capacity. Now here's where it gets interesting. If the UAE and potentially other countries start increasing production, global oil supply will rise, and when supply goes up, prices usually come down. Analysts suggest this could bring down crude prices by around $5 to $10 per barrel over time. And that's a big deal for India, because India imports over 85% of its crude oil needs, making it one of the most vulnerable economies when oil prices rise. Every $10 increase in crude prices significantly raises India's import bill, weakens the rupee, and fuels inflation. So if prices come down, India stands to benefit massively through cheaper petrol and diesel, lower inflation, and reduced pressure on government finances. But there's another important angle here: the weakening of OPEC itself. When a major producer like the UAE exits, it creates cracks within the alliance. It reduces OPEC's ability to enforce production discipline among members, and that could lead to a more competitive global oil market. However, this doesn't mean oil prices will crash overnight. In fact, in the short term, prices are still being driven by geopolitical tensions, especially around the Strait of Hormuz, through which nearly 17 to 20 million barrels of oil pass every day, accounting for about 20% of global supply. Any disruption here continues to keep markets on edge. So, in the near term, volatility will remain, but in the long term, the UAE's decision signals something bigger: a shift away from cartel-driven supply control toward a more open, competitive oil market.
India, China, Russia. World leaders usually build influence through policy, power, or legacy. But in the United States, something very different is unfolding. Under Donald Trump, politics is starting to look like branding. Not subtle branding, but full-scale personal branding at level of the state itself. Now, the recent example is US passports that may soon carry Trump's face. As a part of America 250 celebrations marking 250 years of US independence in 2026, the US government is preparing a limited edition passport that features Trump's portrait on the inside pages alongside the Declaration of Independence and American flag. His signature will also appear in gold, turning what is usually a neutral government document into something far more personal. Now, this is not symbolic one-off. These passports are expected to be released in limited numbers. Reports suggest anywhere from 25,000 to 250,000 copies, and will be available through select government offices. But this move is just one part of a much bigger trend. Across the United States government, Trump's image and name are increasingly being embedded into official systems, spaces, and symbols. For instance, his likeness is already set to appear on commemorative coins, including a proposed $1 coin and even a 24-karat gold coin. Now, there are also plans to include his signature on US currency, which would make him the first sitting president to have such presence on money. It doesn't stop there. Trump's image is reportedly being appeared on national park passes alongside historical figures like George Washington. Government buildings, including departments like agriculture and labor, have displayed large banners with his face. There are even proposals and approvals for large symbolic projects, including a massive monument informally dubbed as Arc de Trump. Put all of this together and a clear picture is emerging. This is not just governance, it's brand building at a national scale. Now, branding in politics is not a very new topic. Leaders across the world, from Narendra Modi to Xi Jinping, have cultivated strong personal images. But there's a difference. Most leaders build narratives through campaigns, speeches, and policy visibility. What's happening in the United States right now goes a step further. It embeds the leader's identity directly into state-issued objects and institutions. This is why critics are calling it a form of personality-driven governance, or even a soft version of a cult of personality, where the line between the nation and the leader begins to blur. Historically, such practices have been more common in authoritarian regimes where leaders' faces appear on currency, monuments, and official documents. Seeing similar patterns in democratic systems like the United States is what is making this moment unusual. Supporters, however, see it very differently. They argue that this is about legacy and celebration, especially during a historic milestone like America's 250th anniversary. For them, Trump is not just a president, but a defining figure of the era. So placing him on a commemorative item is justified. But beyond politics, there's a deeper idea here: the power of personal branding. Trump, long before entering politics, has built his image as a businessman, TV personality, and a deal maker. From real estate towers to television shows like The Apprentice, his strategy has always been the same: put the brand front and center, his name, his face, and his identity. Now, that same playbook seems to be extending into governance. And that raises a bigger question here. Where do we draw the line between nation building and brand building? Because when passports, currencies, and monuments and public institutions begin to carry the identity of one individual, it changes how power is perceived. It shifts the focus from institutions to personalities, from systems to individuals. Indian aviation sector is in a serious crisis, and the industry has now, in an urgent letter to the government, warned that all flights could stop if the situation does not get better. But what is the situation? Well, oil prices across the world have risen. It may not have been having very significant impact at petrol pumps near you in India, but for the aviation industry, jet fuel prices have spiked to nearly 55%. And that is making flying more expensive. But that's not all. Our next report gives you a bigger picture.
India's aviation sector is staring at a serious crisis right now, and it all comes down to one thing: fuel prices. India's top airlines, including Air India, Indigo, and SpiceJet, have written an urgent letter to the government, warning that the situation is becoming non-operable and could even force them to stop flights altogether. At the center of the issue is aviation turbine fuel, or ATF, the single biggest cost for airlines. Typically, fuel makes up about 30 to 40% of an airline's expenses. But now, because of soaring global oil prices, that number has shot up to nearly 55 to 60%. So what's driving this spike? The answer lies globally. Ongoing tensions in West Asia, especially around critical oil supply routes like the Strait of Hormuz, have pushed crude oil prices sharply higher. And since India imports most of its oil, airlines are feeling the direct impact. But there's another problem: taxes. Airlines say that high excise duty and state-level VAT on ATF are making things worse. In some states, VAT can go as high as 20 to 25%, making fuel in India significantly more expensive than in many other countries. Because of this, airlines are now struggling to keep many routes viable, especially international ones. They say that even when global crude prices ease, ATF prices in India don't fall proportionately, making planning and pricing extremely difficult. So what are airlines asking for? Immediate relief. This includes cutting or suspending excise duty on jet fuel, reducing state taxes, and creating a more predictable pricing system. Without these changes, airlines warn they may be forced to cut flights, reduce capacity, or hike ticket prices. And for passengers, the impact is simple: higher airfares and fewer flight options. In fact, airlines have already started passing on some of these costs. And if fuel prices remain high, flying could soon become significantly more expensive.
India has always had a deep emotional and cultural connection with gold. From weddings to festivals, jewelry has traditionally dominated how Indians buy gold. But in 2026, we saw a complete shift in how India views gold itself. For the first time ever, gold investment demand has overtaken jewelry demand in India. According to data from World Gold Council, this shift happened in the March quarter of 2026, marking a structural change in one of the world's largest gold markets. Let's look at the numbers now. India's gold investment demand surged 52% year-on-year to 82 tons, while jewelry demand fell 19.5% to just 66 tons. That means investments through gold bars, coins, and ETFs now make up 54.3% of total gold consumption compared to roughly 25% historically. Overall, gold demand still rose about 10% to 151 tons, but the composition has completely changed. So what's driving this dramatic shift? The biggest reason is the price. Gold prices in India have nearly doubled since early 2025, making jewelry significantly more expensive, not just because of the gold itself, but also due to additional making charges that can add 10 to 15% on top of the base price. At the same time, financial uncertainty is pushing investors towards gold as a safe haven. Stock markets have delivered relatively muted returns. India's benchmark indices have grown only marginally compared to the sharp rise in the gold prices. So both retail investors and institutional investors are reallocating money into gold, not for tradition, but for wealth preservation and returns. And it's not just physical gold. Financial products are also seeing a boom. Gold ETFs, for example, saw inflows jump over 180% year-on-year to around 20 tons. Now, this trend didn't start overnight. Even in 2025, gold investment demand had already risen sharply, making up around 42% of total consumption, up from just 29% a year earlier. Traditionally, gold in India served two purposes: ornamentation and security. Jewelry was both an investment and cultural asset, but now those two roles are separating. Consumers are increasingly asking, why pay extra for the design and making charges when I can just buy pure gold? That's a fundamental mindset change. And the change is coming at a time when young buyers are becoming more financially aware and portfolio driven. Instead of buying gold only during weddings or festivals, they are now treating it as another asset class, similar to stocks, mutual funds, or real estate. But this shift has consequences. For jewelry industry, this could mean slower growth or even structured decline in demand, especially for heavy traditional jewelry pieces. In response, many jewelers are now adapting, offering lighter designs, lower carat gold, and even digital gold products to stay relevant. But here's a bigger macroeconomic implication. When a country like India, one of the world's largest gold consumers, starts buying gold primarily as an investment, it reflects uncertainty in other asset classes too. It signals that investors are now looking for safety over risk, stability over growth. That's all for this week. I will see you in the next. Keep watching ET Now for more such news and views.